I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. The city of Takoma Park is in the final heated throes of envisioning a redevelopment opportunity created by the departure 4 years ago of the Washington Adventist Hospital from its 18-acre campus in the small municipality of 17,000 people at the northern edge of Washington, D.C., whose super progressive politics have earned it the moniker the People's Democratic Republic of Takoma Park and the Berkeley of the East. Takoma Park is an avowed nuclear-free zone, a tree city, allows 16-year-olds to vote in local elections, prides itself for its diversity, its rent stabilization law, and its intense political participation. It has also, incredibly, seen its population go down the last 50 years by 1,000 people, while Montgomery and Prince George's counties have more than doubled their size. It's not that more people don't want to live in Takoma Park, but rather the city, for all its progressive credentials, has made it impossible to build new affordable housing units to accommodate newcomers, even as the median home price in 2023 rose to over $800,000. The People's Republic, it seems, was only for those people who came before and bought cheap. The Washington Adventist Hospital redevelopment opportunity, formalized as a minor master plan from the Montgomery County Planning Board, is now with the Montgomery County Council for a vote. At a hearing last week, older residents of the city came out in large numbers to oppose the shape of the plan because of the number of new units the plan proposed to add, the new height allowances for buildings, the potential for environmental damage, and changes to the character of the city, as well as the possible loss of existing affordable housing units. I called Takoma Park Mayor Talisha Searcy for a lowdown on the minor master plan and the Pandora's box it has opened. I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are dirty, messy, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from DC area power pop band Dear Daria, whose second EP, Solastalgia, came out January 27th. Mary Jo Matea on vocals, guitar and keys, Joshua Hunter, guitar, Eamon Donnelly, bass, and Dan ABH on drums. You can find them on Bandcamp at Dear Daria Band. In the news this week, Respiratory illness hospitalizations, including COVID, in Maryland continues to go down. 15.8 per 100,000 last week. It was 17.6 the week before. Anything over 10 cases per 100,000 calls for broad source control or masking. EMS personnel, school nurses, doctors' offices are all masking now. If you are in congregate settings, you might consider masking. The news from Baltimore can be grim. A state audit of 2022 Baltimore police overtime data showed that 7 officers had made more than $100,000 in overtime pay. 100 officers had clocked over 1,000 overtime hours that year. For comparison, a regular work year is 2,000 hours. The Red Line train the city needs and Governor Moore promised to build is looking unlikely because of the state's transportation budget, and now the federal government has turned down Maryland's request for $3 billion to fund the Beltway expansion. But last week, the Baltimore Ravens' journey to the AFC Championship at home against Kansas City brought joy. The city geared up for a party. Taylor Swift's presence brought new fans to the game. Wes Moore, the governor, shotgunned beer at a tailgate. And then the Ravens turned in a performance full of turnovers and lost opportunities that led to Kansas City victory and some great pictures of Swift and her KC tight end boyfriend, Travis Kelce. And we are back in business. In Montgomery County, the Board of Education and MCPS Superintendent Monifa McKnight have been under siege due to a sexual harassment scandal. And now there will be a county council oversight hearing next week. The school board privately asked the superintendent to resign. McKnight pushed back, saying that the ask was not justified. Evan Glass and Don Lutke, county council members, appear to want quick and swift action, including possibly removal. The Montgomery County Education Association, the teachers' union, has weighed in publicly to say that McKnight does bear responsibility. The principals and staff unions have also taken similar positions, but less public. The County Council's Education and Culture Committee Chair, Will Joando, is taking a more wait-and-see approach and previously called for due process on behalf of McKnight. Montgomery County NAACP President Linda Plummer has written a public letter that the Board of Education is trying to scapegoat the superintendent. County Council President Andrew Friedson told Moco 360 that it would be inappropriate for the council to remove McKnight. But he has also called for the redacted portions of the Inspector General's investigatory reports on the scandal to be released. As all this is going on, an important education policy change passed under the radar. MCPS is doing away with the 50% rule, which had bedeviled teachers for many years, especially since the pandemic. The rule gave students a 50% score on an assignment even if they didn't do the assignment, and was intended to show grace to students having difficulties at home and in their lives. But teachers complained that students simply disregarded school assignments as a result. On the flip side, MCPS is getting rid of GoGuardian, an electronic firewall teachers use to make sure that students working on computers in class are not goofing off on YouTube or another entertainment website. So this makes it harder for teachers to assert control over the class. MCPS and other school districts around the country are reconsidering pandemic-era policies now in an effort to stem falling attendance among students, and making schoolwork more consequential is one proposed answer. We follow education issues closely, and if you are interested, give us a follow on your favorite streaming service. This week, the president of Prince George's County, Local 1619 of the International Association of Firefighters, Grant Walker, made the extraordinary claim that short staffing had led to a single engine responding to a building fire in Bowie. That's supposed to be a no-no. Staff shortages is a widespread problem throughout public safety and local government. And I asked Walker what happened exactly.
On Friday, January 26th, Prince George's County saw a significant amount of calls for service for the fire department. Hospital wait times were too long. We were averaging about 40 calls an hour. The department made the decision to take 2 engines out of service to what we refer to as upstaff ambulances. So they took the crews that were responding on those engines, took the engines out of service, and those firefighters got on ambulances to put more ambulances into our response system. These engines were downstaffed or unstaffed, leaving Station 39, which is the volunteer fire department on Annapolis Road, out of service, Station 43 off of Mitchellville Road, out of service, and Station 19 in Old Bowie, out of service, leaving just Engine 816 Northview in service. And at 9:04, call came into our dispatch center for a report of a fire in a home on London Lane. Engine 816 showed up on scene just shy of 5 minutes after dispatch. They are the closest unit to that call. They dropped a line or put hose on the street, waiting for the next engine to come and pick up that line and begin to investigate. Unfortunately, the next closest engines were all out of service, which means that the next engine that was coming to them was significantly farther away than if those companies had been in service. The next engine, it took them 10 minutes to get on scene. The NFPA, National Fire Protection Administration, says that a fire doubles in size every 30 seconds.
So the fire was managed, everything was fine, nobody was injured. Okay, let's say
Yes,
that first.
Thankfully, yes.
But let's talk about the big picture.
Sure.
How many short are you normally in terms of recruitment?
So according to all of our numbers, we are currently 75 bodies short for our complement today. And by all estimates, to actually appropriately staff what we're supposed to be staffing, we're 232 firefighters short.
How many are you right now?
1040 is what our current strength is at.
What is your starting salary?
Currently, it is $46,000 a year.
What is it in, say, Washington, D.C. or Montgomery?
Washington, D.C. is $60,000 to start right now. Montgomery County, roughly $58,000 a year.
Apart from pay, is there anything else that would solve the problem?
Faster hiring process. We opened an open announcement for hiring at May 1st. And we hired our first class off of that announcement in the end of November. So that's 7 months. And 7 months of waiting is 21 people that we've lost to attrition.
So you don't have HR staff to do this? Is that the problem?
Just like our fire department, our administrative staff is overworked. They're understaffed.
It seems that your biggest shortage is on the ambulance side, even more than the firefighters. So why not just focus on EMS personnel?
Sure. So we actually are cross-trained. So all of our firefighters are EMTs.
Not all EMTs have to be firefighters, right?
In our current system, that is how we are set up. All EMTs are firefighters in the career realm. However, that's not to say that it couldn't be done.
Grant Walker, thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, sir.
And now for this week's legislative update. Here is Cecilia Plant of the Maryland Legislative Coalition.
Hi, Sunil. The governor just dropped his bills. It's a Democratic majority legislature, and he is a Democratic governor. Their value systems align very nicely. The legislature is going to try and give him what he wants within reason. I mean, some of his bills will get modified.
Do you have a sense of which things he will not get?
Anything that is going to cost too much money. If it doesn't cost money, it's very likely to get passed.
On the housing package, however, there's a bill that allows multifamily affordable housing to be built in single family zoning areas that doesn't have a big fiscal impact. But I have heard that the chances are pretty low that that's going to go through.
That's not an issue with the legislature necessarily. That is more an issue with local governments. And they are involved as well. They are the silent partners in all of this because they are very affected by what the legislature and the governor do. So, there's going to be pushback, of course, from the local governments because whenever you change zoning, that's their baby. So they will get pushback from their constituents and they will likewise push back on the legislature. So it's really a matter of how much pushback it gets and what they think they can compromise on.
Meanwhile, you have other things to talk about.
The End of Life Act is top of my list. That is a bill that basically will allow terminal patients to end their life. So first of all, the person must be terminal within the next 6 months. They have to decide to do this. They have to notarize it. They have to get their doctor and another doctor to agree. They have to go through a psychiatric evaluation. I mean, there's all kinds of hooks to try and make sure that the person doing this truly wants to end their life. That is a bill that has had a lot of trouble with the legislature. There's a lot of pushback with that from both the disability community and from the religious community. The Prescription Drug Affordability Board, we passed that several years ago. It's been languishing, hasn't had all of its members on board, hasn't had funding. So this is a bill that is going to require that the governor put at least $1 million in the budget every year for the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. And it's also requiring them to set up their processes and do what they need to do to set the upper payment limits on various drugs.
So related to healthcare, is the bill for extending healthcare to undocumented, that's also up, right?
It just came out. It came out, I think, in the last day or so. It does not have a hearing yet, but yes, it is back.
What else?
There is a bill on disinformation on large social media platforms, and it requires them to make attempts to monitor disinformation, to close accounts of those people who are pushing out the disinformation, and to report to the State Board of Elections whenever this happens.
If they can do it, that'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. On that end of the world, there is also a bill on protecting election officials. It will give you 3 years in jail and a $2,500 fine for threatening an election official. The only other thing is housing. We got a couple bills there. We have there is a bill that basically changes the income requirements and the assessed value of homes that would keep people from getting into the programs for property tax credits. So the programs that help people with property tax have been around for 15 years, and the income requirements and the assessed value of homes that will allow you to get into those programs were set 15 years ago. The assessed value of the home is going from $300,000 to $450,000. And then the last one is rental assistance for community school families. So for the community schools are the ones that have a preponderance of low income people. And so this is providing rental assistance and requiring those schools to have like a coordinator that looks into which people are not are behind on their rent, which people are unemployed, and it's trying to keep those people from becoming homeless.
Thank you, Cecilia.
All right. Thanks, Sunil. Talk to you soon.
That's Cecilia Plant from the Maryland Legislative Coalition. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I'll be back with Takoma Park Mayor Talisha Searcy to get the lowdown on the minor master plan brouhaha. This next song from Dear Daria is called Making a Dying.
Every morning, day after day, it's always the same, never any change. So I am proposing we pack up and go, challenge the status quo and everything we know. Not making a living if you just work until you die. This can't be how we were meant to spend our lives. Always searching, but we never seem to find that peace of mind.
Talisha Searcy, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
When Washington Adventist Hospital left Takoma Park now almost 4 years ago, there was a historic opportunity for redevelopment in your city, that has not added any new housing for almost 50 years. You've been working on this for several years now. What have you come up with?
The hope with the Washington Adventist old hospital site is to use that parcel in a way that could advance a number of the city's goals. Housing. We heard through a lot of engagement, not only from our residents, but from students that currently attend Washington Adventist University, that they need housing, and housing is a huge priority for our city. We've also heard that the access to some aspects of commercial retail would be beneficial. A lot of folks don't talk about the fact that Washington Adventist Hospital was our city's largest employer. So making sure that we were able to have some flexibility within the plan that would allow for employers as well as housing development in the city was critically important as well.
How many more units of housing are you trying to add? What kind of commercial building that you're trying to attract? I just want to understand what this is going to look like.
But the plan allows for anywhere of up to 3,000 new units. But the biggest thing is that we want to have flexibility to not only have more housing units, but also employers. So there's a bit of a trade-off. And that's why you see throughout the plan, there's lots of mixed use approaches that can allow for not only commercial development, but housing development, as well as new public amenities within our community. So we really tried to take a holistic approach to thinking about what are some of the major shortcomings or gaps that currently exist, and what are some of the novel ways that we can work with the planning, Montgomery County planning staff and the planning board to see how this zoning plan could try to tackle some of those issues.
Is the flexibility about the ratio between the new residential units and the commercial space that you're building? Is that the flexibility you're looking for?
You could have a developer that, say, has a zone, they want to build in a zone that allows for up to 120 feet of development. But if they're coming to the table with something like, hey, we may want to build a recreation center for the community on the ground floor. That flexibility allows for you to be able to, through the planning process, say, okay, well, we'll allow for something like that in exchange for maybe giving you a little bit more height. Or we will allow for your development, but we want to make sure, for example, and you see this throughout the plan, that you are making sure that you are providing enough green space and setbacks that others within the community can enjoy.
One of the controversial aspects of the plan, as I have heard, is with respect to the height that you just mentioned. What is the height that is currently allowed, and what might be allowed in the future given the new zoning?
Within the plan area, we have buildings that vary in height. We may have a 1-story, 2-story commercial building, and we may have a 12-story multifamily apartment building. And so what the plan does is it goes through all of the parcels within the plan area to identify, one, what is the current zoning for that parcel and what is the current height. What we found was that there were some buildings that actually were under zones that no longer exist, or heights that kind of exceeded whatever zone they were in. So some had to be moved. And then we had some that we actually wanted to make sure that there was flexibility for growth, right? So I mentioned we have a building on Maple Avenue that is a 1.5-story small commercial property. It's a couple of storefronts, a couple of restaurants, a hair salon. That property is being rezoned under this plan to allow for more max height. And so that would be, in some cases, it could be 65 feet. And in other cases, it can go up to 150 feet.
65 feet is what? 6 stories?
It's a little under 6 stories, yeah.
Okay. And 150 is like 15 stories?
It's about a little less, so more or less like 12 or so.
Okay.
The Washington Advances site currently is about, give or take, 10 stories. Under this plan, that parcel will get up to 120 feet. Right. Also, there's some topography things there. So the building will look like 6 stories in some places, 10 in others, just because it's on a slope.
The total plan area that you're looking at right now is, 132 acres that goes over Sligo Creek, which is on the west side of the Washington Adventist parcel, and then further into the Maple Avenue.
Plan is actually separated into 3 districts. One is the municipal district, and that includes our community buildings, Piney Branch Elementary. And then the second district is the Maple Avenue district. That includes a lot of our multifamily properties that are along Maple Avenue. Many of them, of course, rent stabilized or deed restricted units. And then you have the Flower Avenue district, and that includes the Washington Advances Hospital site, the Washington Advances University, as well as the adjoining parcels to those properties. So we thought it would be best back in 2021, when the council was really looking at the boundaries for the plan, to not just think about the hospital in isolation, but to really think about the full breadth of our city and that segment of the city. The city of Takoma Park had a master plan that hadn't been updated in a while, and we really just saw this as a chance to revisit some of the zoning that goes beyond the Washington Advances site.
What is the logic behind that? Why do you think these need to be connected?
Sure. So one, I think when we're talking about zoning plans, we often think about new, right? We don't necessarily think about upgrades. So we have a number of buildings, a lot of our multifamily buildings on Maple Avenue that are aging, in need of repair. And so one of the things that we wanted to make sure of is not just that we have the availability of housing, but the housing that we have is of good quality and high quality. And so one of the things we wanted to make sure of was when we were thinking about our municipal buildings, and we could talk about that, but it seems like each area in the districts that we're talking about needed a thing, right? So on Maple Avenue, yes, some would argue you have a lot of density there. You have a lot of multifamily buildings that are there, but a number of them need substantial repair. They need investment in terms of ensuring that the people who live there have high quality access to to housing. And so one thought is that revisiting some of the zoning tied to those parcels, which might open up the door for increased density, which may ultimately help to lead to some of the investment that's needed in a number of these buildings, was one way to kind of think through that. Another thing is, like, even in our municipal district, some may say, well, why are you all looking at why is that included? One of the big pieces that's in our municipal district is Piney Branch Elementary. And we were having, of course, a need for making sure that there is adequate capacity there. But we also know that there's a strong need for construction and improvements to that school. So we wanted to make sure that, hey, let's think about all of these things together to see whether or not there's going to be a greater need for us to expand or rethink the zoning or think through things like Bashir's Run or floodplain management to really try to help all aspects of that stretch of our city that may have different things. So yes, Washington Advance's hospital was a major thing, but there were a lot of other smaller things throughout this whole section of the city that we were hoping to try to get information about and ultimately address through this plan.
At the hearing that you had over the plan in front of the county council, I heard you say, talk about the rent stabilization law that Takoma Park has. There seems to be some back and forth on this over the issue of whether the law and to what extent new construction is exempted from rent stabilization. So first of all, tell me, what is the Takoma Park law with respect to new construction? And then we'll talk about where you want to take it.
Sure. So for the city of Takoma Park, rent stabilization means that if you invest or you build a building for the first 5 years in which you own that building and you're renting it out, you have a 5-year exemption for renting the property at the market rate. So for us, it's 5 years. The county, I believe, just released a law, and I think they have 20-year exemption.
I was going to say that the plan now proposes that the Takoma Park rent stabilization law be brought into alignment with the county law. Is that the deal?
That is what the planning board opined on.
They would be right.
It is not the planning board's job to opine on municipal law. If there is a change that needs to happen to our rent stabilization law, then that is something that the city of Takoma Park and its council will decide.
So I understand the tough battle, but but substantively, let's have this discussion. Takoma Park has not had major redevelopment for 50 years, as we said. Takoma Park's population is basically a straight line for 50 years, even as every other jurisdiction around Takoma Park has grown by at least 100%, right? So they have doubled and your population is static. You've not had any development, in part due to the fact that the new construction reprieve that is in the rental stabilization law is kind of does not incentivize developers to go in for it, right? The math doesn't work out, as you said. Bringing it into line with the county, is that something that should be considered even prior to passing this plan?
I would say the plan does not need to be held up while the city decides on or figures out what its next steps are in terms of its housing policies, right?
Okay. The problem with that is that you know that there is a strong contingent in Takoma Park that wants no expansion whatsoever. Without the lever of the plan, what is your hope that you're going to be able to push through a change to the rent stabilization law, of which everybody is proud. But in the process, then what does it do to your, the minor master plan or the development you are seeking or the new infrastructure you want to build? What does that do? Because you can't change the rent stabilization, the new construction reprieve part.
Well, first, I just want to say it's not that we can't change it. I'm just saying that requires the city to do its work to identify options, be it modifications to rent stabilization or modifications to a number of other policies that we have that could be used as levers.
Okay, Mayor, let's hear it. What ideas you got?
Great. So there's a couple of things that we are starting to explore as a city. One of them is aspects of our payment in lieu of taxes policy. So how can we create, either through tax incentives through the city or working in partnership with the county, ways in which we may be able to offer tax breaks to incentivize development?
There is this question, especially around Maple Avenue, about affordable housing and losing affordable housing. What is your thoughts about that? Are you hoping for 3,000 more units? At the current MPDU rate, that is at best 450 units. What does it do to current units that you already have that are affordable?
Right now on Maple Avenue, there's about 23 buildings. Of those buildings, 8 of them are deed restricted, meaning they've received state funds for the purpose of providing affordable housing. That means they cannot do what a lot of landlords do in these kinds of environments, and that is rip everything down and push everybody out and ask for the highest bidder, right? Many of these properties, the earliest expiration of that deed restriction is 2043. Some of them go as late as 2057. Now, there are other buildings perhaps that are not deed restricted, but there's a bunch of tools that either we have to flesh out more or develop in order to ensure that there isn't displacement or we're not allowing for certain types of activities to happen that could ultimately result in a loss of affordability. So for example, in the city of Takoma Park, we have tenants' first rights, right? So it allows for, if a building is being sold, the renters can actually come in and take ownership of the building. And we've worked with tenants to actually do that in the city, to take acquisition of their building and to in order to ensure that it's something that they can continue to live in.
These deed restricted properties are interesting because you also want improvement in the properties. So, on the one hand, you're saying deed restrictions will prevent the loss of affordable housing. On the other hand, you do want these improvements, and improvements cost money and increase rent. Where is the balance and how do you achieve it? It seems that some of it may not be in your hands.
Yeah. I don't control the market, right? I don't control the market. The only thing that I control is what we as a city can offer, right? So even if you're talking about things like deed restricted properties, if we were to allow, and this is what this plan is designed to do, to allow for more density, for example. So then you can have a very large building that doesn't necessarily have to displace anyone. But let's say they decide, we're going to add another 100 units. And we can do that if we build on the sides and kind of take over a huge parking lot that's in front of us. Maybe we want to do underground. That cost of that construction, true indeed, is costly. But the idea is that the property would ultimately be able to create enough more units to create some aspects of the spread of those costs of the renovations. So the idea of the zoning plan allows for that increased density in that infill to at least allow for that option for recouping some of the costs of construction. I know the onus is on me, and the onus is on the county, and the onus is on all of us to figure out what are some of the other incentives that we may want to have to allow for development to and encourage the development to happen while not at the sacrifice of people who are currently in those buildings or could not afford market rate rent. We've had rent stabilization longer, so I think a lot of times people want to use this as a cautionary tale. But I do think that if the market was self-correcting, we wouldn't be in a housing crisis, right? Like if the market could fix itself.
Well, I think people who say that the housing supply problem is the issue here will blame the government for not getting out of the way.
Yeah. That's possible. I mean, and that's why I think zoning, to that regard, I think zoning has a strong role in that, to have something like a hospital site in our plan that was zoned for either a hospital or single family homes. Right. So making sure that we're able to adjust the zoning to allow for, now whether or not it's going to actually happen is that's on me, that's on the market and all of those things, but at least we can have zoning in place that makes it allowed.
Have you considered including within the plan a higher MPDU level?
There was lots of discussion. And one of the elements, kind of like how how I was saying, hey, planning board, don't opine on my rent stabilization law, right? When we said, hey, we would want higher MDP, but that's the county's rule, right? We don't do our own zoning. So one of the things that is a thought is like, okay, so how do we communicate when certain plans come before us, right? What's the right MDPU mix that we're looking for? We're in a unique place because we do have that rent stabilization law. So usually we don't have as a tough of an issue when it comes to the rental side. But when you're talking about those condos or perhaps home ownership opportunities, that's something that I do think is important.
I want to make sure that listeners know that MPDU stands for Moderately Priced Dwelling Units, which is the county's inclusive zoning program that provides a certain percentage of every new development be affordable by certain standards. That number is 12.5% for most of the county and 15% in down county areas. I want to talk about another thing that you have been concerned about, and you brought it up at the hearing, is the Piney Branch Elementary School and the need for a new facility there. That is not in your hands, is actually somewhat in the county council's hands, but for us, it is in the hands of Montgomery County Public Schools, which is
That's another podcast.
Yeah, that's another podcast. But what I want to understand is, it is a really small footprint. It's less than 2 acres. Is your view, is the council's view of this, that there will be a multi-level building, like the county's first multi-level elementary school there?
We can't talk about the need to create all of this added housing, right? And simultaneously know that the footprint of access to land is getting smaller and smaller. And then just think magically space is going to appear for public services, right? So we have to be creative. Either the county has to be ready to spend more money to acquire property, or we're going to have to try to make use out of the parcels that we have, and what are some of the effective and innovative ways to do that. Otherwise, our kids keep going to schools that are just in poor form.
Is it your understanding that it would be cheaper to build up than to acquire new land?
It is my understanding, based on conversations that we've had with the city council as late as Wednesday with MCPS. You can watch the tape. That the acquisition of property was one of the major barriers. MCPS has a lot of rules, rightfully so, around the types of parcels that are allowable for a school, rightfully so. But my understanding has been, after lots of conversations, the cost to actually acquire those properties are pretty great. And so because of that, that's one of the limiting factors.
Okay, let's talk about another set of public infrastructure, the crossing over Sligo Creek. What's going to happen there? What is the plan?
There are already crossings of Sligo Creek from Flower Ave. There's already, bridges and things. They're just not easily connected. So, for example, to get from Washington Adventist University, you have to walk perhaps through areas that don't have a clear sidewalk or through parking lots in order to get down to walk across. And so one of the things that we really wanted, and we heard a lot from residents, is improving that connectivity to make it easier, making sure that we're doing things like making it easier for bikers to be able to easily access the park and the different amenities, and making it really easy for walkers, so they don't have to necessarily go through parking lots and back roads with no sidewalks in order to get access to the park.
You're looking to the county for more public infrastructure money. Is that the plan? Is appeal to county to provide all of this?
I mean, I want to say that, the city is willing to do its fair share, right? But it's important that when we are going through all of these, creating these zoning plans, coming up with all of the great infrastructure improvements that would be beneficial, not just to the city of Takoma Park residents, but to county residents at large, that there's a shared cost, and everyone needs to understand and recognize that they are as equally invested in these things happening than just the city.
Mayor, make the case for why my tax dollars have to pay for Takoma Park to have a connected Maple Avenue and Washington Adventist parcel.
Think about the fact that maybe you don't live in Takoma Park. You live right on the outside border of Takoma Park. There are now Purple Line stations. There's the Arliss station. There's other amenities that are starting to crop up. And so you're going to want to be able to easily access those things. And so having bikeways, that makes it really easy for people who live in Silver Spring, who maybe want to go to the Arliss train station from Sligo Creek, or making it really easy if we have additional housing that's created for students to be able to easily navigate outside, getting out of their cars, and therefore not creating more traffic on the streets, because it's a lot easier and safer for people to walk and ride their bikes. It benefits us all.
Quite the undertaking you have there, Mayor. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. As you build more, come on back on the show.
I will be happy to. I would love to.
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I am Sunil Dasgupta. I'll be back with the wrap up, more music, and lessons from my conversation with Takoma Park Mayor Talisha Searcy.
Consume all the knowledge, those who went before, who opened up the door, ones you can't ignore. Step outside your comfort zone and you may see that there is more than just one way to be.
What lessons can we draw from Takoma Park's 50-year struggle with redevelopment, which might be shaking loose as a result of a new plan to develop the old land where the Washington Adventist Hospital used to sit, and the adjoining areas going over Sligo Creek to Maple Avenue, the city's high-rise affordable housing section. It is worth reiterating that Takoma Park's unwillingness to add more housing units has kept the city at about the same population it was 50 years ago. This is through a time when every other jurisdiction around it has grown dramatically. The city has not added significant new affordable housing units since the 1980s, soon after it put in place a rent stabilization law. The benefit has been that Takoma Park accounts for 4% of Montgomery County's housing stock, but holds 9% of the county's affordable housing units. In public policy, of course, there is always a cost. The city has remained stagnant in population. No new buildings have been built. The condition of old buildings and infrastructure have fallen behind. Just to clarify, this is not about rebuilding single-family homes, which has happened aplenty. Small Takoma Park homes now sell for close to $1 million and then are torn down or heavily upgraded into McMansions and sell for $1.5 million. Large home additions are quite common. What is at stake here are apartments which, because they use less land, cost less and are therefore more affordable. Takoma Park wears its progressive character on its sleeve and every lapel pin, bumper sticker, and yard sign it can muster. And yet the city has been housing exclusive. If you listen to the video from the minor master plan hearing, it is extraordinary how many people do not care that Takoma Park has been housing stagnant for 50 years. One resident, a biologist, made a classic argument from her field, pitting the housing of humans against protecting wildlife. A line of thinking that 50 years ago led to screeds such as Garrett Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons and Paul Ehrlich's population bomb. The best way to protect wildlife, it turns out, is to allow more housing close to Washington, D.C., like in Takoma Park, and not force people to move further and further away just to find cheaper housing. The Takoma Park City Council, including Mayor Searcy, has voted in favor of the minor master plan 6-1. But even Mayor Searcy wants changes to the plan, which seeks at this point to compel Takoma Park to align its rent stabilization reprieve for new construction from the city's 5-year limit to the county's much longer limit of over 20 years. A longer period means that developers will not be subject to rent control provisions for longer, which would make redevelopment projects more attractive and therefore more likely. It's a way to actually get the market to do what you want: build more housing. But the city's official position to having the minor master plan document tie their hands means that this part of the plan might be struck. Both the Takoma Park City Council and the Montgomery County Council, which must vote on the plan now, are intently listening to community voices, and this step could mollify opposition. But it will also mean that the redevelopment of Takoma Park may be slow in coming. Mayor Searcy is of the view that the city could compensate developers with tax rebates rather than changing the rent stabilization law. But it is unclear how much and how long these rebates would have to last for developers to become interested in new projects. One thing she has on her side is that a number of buildings on Maple Avenue are owned and run by affordable housing nonprofits whose mission is not simply to charge more rent. That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, and assistant producers Daniel Galileo and Katarina Gasek, with support from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from DC area power pop band Dear Daria, whose second EP, Solastalgia, came out January 27th. Mary Jo Matea on vocals, guitar, and keys, Joshua Hunter, guitar, Eamon Donnelly, bass, and Dan ABH on drums. You can find them on Bandcamp at Dear Daria Band. We are going out with the Dear Daria song, On the Inside. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Still need to go fetch the mail, wash your clothes, clean up the house, get to bed so you can do it all